Ronald Belford Bon Scott was an Australian singer and songwriter. He was the lead vocalist and lyricist of the hard rock band acdc from 1974 until his death in 1980. Born in Forfar in Angus, Scotland, Scott spent his early years in Currymuir. He moved to Australia with his family in 1952 at the age of 6, living in Melbourne for 4 years before settling in Fremantle, Western Australia. On the 15th of February 1980, Scott attended a session where Malcolm and Angus Young were working on the beginnings of the 2 songs that will later be recorded on a Back in Black album, Have a Drink on Me and Let Me Put My Love Into You, with Scott accompanying on drums rather than singing or writing lyrics. Days earlier, Scott had gone with Mick Cox to visit their friends, the French group Trust, and a Scorpio sound studio in London, where they recorded the album Repression. Scott was working on the English adaptation of text by Bernie Bonvoisin for the English version of the album. During this visit, the musicians did a jam session of Ride On. This improvised session was Scott's last recording. Sometime during the late evening of 18th of February and early morning of 19th of February, Scott passed out and died at the age of 33. He had just visited a London club called The Music Machine, currently known as Coco. He was left to sleep in a Renault 5 owned by his friend Alistair Kinner at 67 Over Hill Road in East Dulwich. Later that day, Kinner found Scott lifeless and alerted the authorities. Scott was taken to King's College Hospital in Camberwell, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. The official report of the coroner concluded that Scott had died of acute alcohol poisoning and classified it as death by misadventure. The chronology of events on 19th of February and when exactly Scott was found dead has been challenged by Jesse Fink's 2017 book Bond, The Last Highway, which quotes late UFO guitarist Paul Chapman as having been informed early that morning by Scott's friend Joe Fury that Scott was dead. Kinner said he found Scott in the evening. Chapman claims Scott and Fury were with him the previous evening of 18th of February, and Scott left his apartment to buy heroin, never to return. Fink's book also claims Scott and Kinner were not alone in East Dulwich, but with a third person, Zena Kakuli, who stayed over at Kinner's apartment while Scott remained in a parked Renault. An updated edition of Fink's book, released in 2018, produces new evidence that a fourth individual, Kakuli's husband, the rock musician Peter Parrott, was also with Scott, Kinner, and Kakuli. Fink contends that pulmonary aspiration of vomit was the cause of Scott's death via suspected heroin overdose. As part of the funeral arrangements, Scott's body was embalmed by Desmond Henley. It was later cremated, and Scott's ashes were interred by his family at Fremantle Cemetery in Fremantle. Shortly after Scott's death, the remaining members of AC/DC briefly considered disbanding. However, it was eventually decided that Scott would have wanted them to continue. And with the Scott family's encouragement, the band hired Brian Johnson as their new vocalist. 5 months after Scott's death, AC/DC finished the work they began with Scott and released Black in Black as a tribute to him. The issue of whether Scott's lyrics were used, uncredited, on the album remains an enduring topic of debate. In Fink's Bond, The Last Highway, he produces interview quotes from Angus Young, admitting that Scott's lyrics were at least partly used, and from Vince Lovegrove that Scott's family received royalties for Black in Black. Scott's girlfriends, Silver Smith and Holy X, both claim Scott wrote the song You Shook Me All Night Long. Like and follow us for more stories in a world of music.